Hello and welcome again to the SOLUTIONSplus learning program. We're happy to still have you, and we will be talking today in Module 3 about getting e-mobility right, opportunities and requirements. As we have seen in the previous modules, e-mobility represents a more fundamental transformation of the mobility system than just a simple replacement of vehicles. Electromobility can generally be understood as any kind of transport mode with an electric motor designed to shift the vehicle design away from the use of fossil fuels and draw their energy from the power grid. So when you're asking yourself, what does electric mobility actually look like? You can say that there's actually a wide spectrum of electric vehicle types available. You see that, for example, with Tesla. There's as an innovative electric car model. We have a variety of electric scooters on our streets now. We have trolley buses, which have been in operation for more than 100 years already in our cities. Electric rickshaws as new and innovative kinds of vehicles. So we really have a wide range of different types of electric vehicles here. And overall, what we want to emphasize is when you look at electric mobility, all of this is electric mobility. So when you're trying to tackle electric mobility and want to address it, also have in mind that there is a wide range of different kinds of vehicles with very different operational settings and requirements. So the opportunities and strategies towards e-mobility implementation depend on the very specific context, the existing challenges and mobility networks in your cities and regions. Within SOLUTIONSplus, we are looking at the differences and similarities of different e-mobility strategies around the globe, such as the implementation of electric two-wheeler schemes, for instance in Passaic, or also the smart depot charging of electric buses in Madrid. And it becomes very visible that fundamentally different context conditions must be taken into account here to bring about an electric mobility solution within these different requirements and context conditions. But how can we assure that electric mobility gets implemented in the right way? And how can we also define success when implementing electric mobility solutions? So very much linked to the question of how to get e-mobility right is looking at the following table here. What challenges can actually be tackled with electric mobility? And first, it is very important to identify the challenges that can be addressed through e-mobility and to set strategic goals. For example, in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it is important to increase the share of renewable energy sources, so to ensure electric vehicles run on green electricity. And to reduce congestion and improve accessibility, a one-to-one replacement of vehicles will not be sufficient, thus also requiring other complementary mobility measures, which we are emphasizing and promoting through our Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning framework. One important policy goal is local air quality. And you can see here on the map the different cities with existing air pollution problems. And as you can see, these are quite a lot of them worldwide. And you can see that in 2012, actually around 3.7 million people around the world died of strokes, heart attacks, chronic bronchitis, lung cancer, and other diseases. And this is very much attributable to air pollution. And because of that, we have seen that quite a few cities across the world have already set up low emission zones or to the point of zero emission zones. And we think that this will definitely become increasingly the norm also in coming years, with more and more cities trying to implement these kind of schemes to avoid and reduce local air pollution. So what is important to take in mind here when you look at electric mobility? What is important is not to forget the framework and not to forget what we are currently trying to achieve with our cities. And what we are trying to achieve is to factor in the human scale, to allocate road space and public space away from cars, be it either driving cars or standing cars, to more sustainable modes of transport, be it walking, cycling or public transport. And we also want to rethink our cities from an urban design perspective, increasing the quality of life for citizens across the world. So when you compare these different solutions here, you can see that the space requirements for people are much less if you put them in a bus than if all of these people are driving their cars individually. And this is also important when looking now at electric mobility. We carried out such a campaigning program in Europe with the so-called Elliptic Factor 100 campaign, where we really took a look at the question, why is it so important to focus more on the electrification of public transport? And we did the one-by-one comparison between cars and an 80-meter bus. And as you can see, a car is being driven just for less than 1 hour per day, whereas buses are in operation from 12 to 16 hours per day. So that's the daily operation time, which is significantly higher for these kinds of vehicles than they are for cars, which are standing around for most of the day. And because also of the tonnage, the annual fuel consumption of buses is much higher, of course, than for cars. So the conclusion that you can draw from this is that if you incentivize the uptake of electric buses, you get savings that are equivalent to 100 electric cars. So again, the question here is, what do you focus on? What do you want to incentivize? And if you incentivize the uptake of electric buses, you get 100-fold the impact that you would achieve by electrifying cars. Another good example for this is the Assured project, in which we are focusing very much on interoperable charging solutions for different kinds of heavy-duty vehicles. And here again, the question is, what do you prioritize and what is most important for cities and regions? And we deliberately took a decision to focus on heavy-duty vehicles because the impacts are significantly higher when you aim to electrify these kinds of vehicles. Fleets are the most polluting ones, so buses and trucks. Fleets cover long distances per day, and there's also a direct decision by public local authorities when you look at fleets. So the impact when electrifying fleets is significantly higher than electrifying vehicles. And even though the vast majority of vehicles on the road are cars, so in this graphic here it's roughly 88%, other vehicle types have a significantly higher proportion of emissions. For example, long-distance trucks are responsible for 37% of NOx emissions, despite just having a 1.3% of the total share of vehicles. This is the same and very similar for vans and buses that account for a very high share of NOx. So again, we want to emphasize here that focusing on those kinds of vehicles and incentivizing also the uptake of those kinds of vehicles, which have a significantly higher amount of emissions, makes a lot of sense for cities and regions. So how can electric mobility steer changes in travel behavior and contribute to more efficient use of resources? And we really think that electric mobility should be seen at and looked at as a potential to enhance the multimodality and the resiliency of the network. It is, again, a chance to give priority to sustainable modes, and it is a chance to provide alternatives and new mobility services to more effectively address user needs. It is also a chance to improve the cost effectiveness of new mobility solutions by exploiting synergies and service integration. And you can see all of this being illustrated on this slide here. Electric mobility for us is really a means to provide multimodal and door-to-door alternatives for users to avoid being dependent on their cars. And this is really a chance to enable a modal shift away from private car ownership and car use to multimodal and more sustainable transport alternatives. And as you can see here, we still think that public transport should, and also in the future should still play a key role as the backbone of these transport chains, being complemented by micromobility and vehicle sharing solutions or cycling and walking to cover entire mobility chains. One good example for this was developed in Arnhem in the Netherlands, and this is really a prime example that shows how electric mobility can create valuable synergies and also new business models for public transport operators and for cities, when it is seen as a systemic change and not only as a technological replacement one by one. And actually, this system here can reduce the operational costs and the energy losses while simultaneously promoting multimodality. The example taken here is a trolleybus network which has been in existence for quite some decades in Arnhem, but now being revolutionized and modernized as a Trolley 2.0 system, in which the trolley grid is being used also as a grid that can charge other kinds of electric vehicles. And the solution here is a multi-purpose charger that is installed along the trolley grid and from which then electric vehicles like cars or bicycles can be charged using the recuperated braking energy from the trolley buses that drive by. And we really think that this is an all-in-one combination for the fast charging of electrical vehicles powered by the local trolley tram network. It reduces the operational costs and the energy losses, and it exploits very much the synergies in the usage of existing infrastructure, while promoting a multimodality and decarbonization at the same time. So how can we promote such types of electric mobility systems? What strategies and support schemes can you actually put in place? And we see quite a variety of strategic, financial, and regulatory incentives. Some of these examples you can see on the right here. These are all examples from mostly European cities that have put in place specific targets for the uptake of electric mobility, and also put in place specific frameworks for how they envision their electric mobility system in their cities as part of the development of sustainable urban mobility planning. First and foremost, through these plans, you can give vision statements and a set of targets. So what do you want to achieve by when regarding the electrification? You can also set in place procurement programs to kickstart demand and stimulate automakers to increase the availability of EVs on the market. There, for instance, you can think of green procurement programs, again, setting certain ratios and percentages of your fleets to become green at a certain point. You can also think of policy measures that increase the value proposition of EVs, like waivers to access restrictions, lower toll or parking fees, and this will also really bring about a higher incentive for people taking up electric vehicles and reducing the costs for them. You can also think of different requirements regarding interoperability and minimum availability levels for publicly accessible charging infrastructure. Here, taking again the example from Assured, you can think of a charger being able to charge different kinds of vehicles, and thus really increasing also the usage of this infrastructure and reducing costs. You can think of regulatory measures related to charging infrastructure, including minimum requirements to ensure EV readiness in new or refurbished buildings and parking lots, and thus already planning ahead and essentially incorporating the requirements that you might have in 5 or 10 years, for instance, being able to charge at homes, already planning this now. And last but not least, of course, you can also think about the deployment of publicly accessible chargers in cities and on highway networks, thus creating enough chargers that are being available to the public and reducing range anxiety for people. It is important here to strengthen planning capacities on the local level, and we hope to give you a brief glimpse into this through this learning program. If you are interested in more good examples, in more tools, and also in more decision support tool, you could take a look here at the electrification topic guide, which we have produced as part of our range of different topic guides that are part of our sustainable urban mobility planning framework. And you will find a lot more good practice examples from various European cities that have implemented and demonstrated electric mobility in their cities and regions in a very good and productive way.